Hi, my name is Jeff Sackman. I run a website called GMAT Hacks, and in addition to GMAT tutoring, I've written several GMAT textbooks, including Total GMAT Verbal and Total GMAT Math. What I want to talk to you about in today's short video is GMAT Verbal Scratchwork. So when you take the GMAT, you've got a pen, kind of like this one, you've got a few sheets of laminated paper to work with, and ideally you're going to use that. You're going to use that to your advantage. On the math section of the GMAT, it's kind of a no-brainer how you're going to use that Scratchwork. If you can get through the GMAT math section without naturally making notes on the paper, I'm very impressed. You're a very unusual test taker. For most people, they need more scratch paper on the math section, not less. But verbal is different. In verbal, you're doing a lot of reading, a lot of thinking, a lot of analyzing answer choices. There's no real clear-cut calculations like there are on the math section, but you still have this pen and you still have that paper. So some people opt to ignore it altogether, to just push the paper aside and do all the work in their head, but some of the smartest test takers take a different approach. What they do is they take advantage of the scratch paper in a variety of different ways. How they do that depends on the type of question and the difficulty of the question, and I'm going to walk you through some of the tactics they use to take advantage of the scratch paper to increase their verbal scores on the GMAT. So the most natural place on the GMAT verbal section to do some scratch work is reading comprehension. In the reading comprehension section, you get a brief passage, usually 3 to 5 paragraphs, and you're asked a few questions about it. One advantage of the computer adaptive format is on the screen, the passage never goes away. You might have to scroll up and down a little bit, but the passage is always taking up half the screen, while the question is taking up the other half of the screen. So the passage is always there, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't take notes. This is the most important part of the GMAT verbal section, to use this pen and take some notes. So what you want to do on the reading comprehension section is make a roadmap or make an outline of the passage as you read it. Now that's the most important part. Don't wait until you read the entire passage and then make an outline. As you're reading the passage, after you finish every individual paragraph or every time you come across something that seems like a major opinion or perspective held by the author of the passage, or something that the author of the passage is going to dispute, then write it down. So when you finish the reading comprehension passage, you'll have something like this. Paragraph 1 of the passage, this is what it said. Maybe you'll have a note here that says, introduction, author argues that, whatever the author's perspective is. Maybe the second paragraph is a point in favor of that argument. So the second point might be an illustration of whatever it is that this specific passage gets into. And the third paragraph might be addressing a reason why some people disagree with this perspective. So you'll just jot down for each one of these paragraphs 8 to 10 words, quick, it doesn't have to be pretty, it doesn't have to be grammatically correct, but jotting down a few words so that you understand the outline of the passage, you understand how the author has structured the passage, and you have a roadmap to go back to when you get to the individual reading comprehension questions. The idea isn't to be able to recreate the passage from scratch, but let's say you've got three or four questions to answer on the passage. You get to the third or fourth question, and it asks for some detail. Now, it might not be a detail you remember, you might not have any clue how to answer it, so you're naturally going to go back to the passage. If it's a long passage, that could take a lot of time, and on the GMAT, you don't have very much time to answer individual reading comprehension questions. So, if you've done your job well with this roadmap, you can look back at the outline, you can figure out this is referring to something in paragraph 3, you can do a quick skim of paragraph 3 and you've cut your work by 2/3 just by having this roadmap. The other big advantage, and this seems to make a big difference to me personally, is that if you're making notes as you read the passage, then you're less likely to lose focus. Reading off of a computer screen it's tough to stay focused, especially when you're reading something that's not very interesting. You might be reading biology or economics or social sciences written in a dry academic tone. So if you're jotting down just a quick note at the end of every paragraph, you're really checking with yourself, do I understand this? Do I know what the author just said? And you're giving yourself a little break from reading. So you read a few sentences, make a note. Read a few more sentences, make a note, and so on. That way, even if you never look back at the notes that you make, and that'll happen occasionally, if you never look back at the notes that you make, you've still got an advantage out of using that Scratchwork. So on reading comprehension, this is the most important point. Make an outline to keep yourself on task and to have a reference for the individual questions you'll face when you get past the passage itself. Now, on sentence correction and critical reasoning, the other 2/3 of the GMAT section, the GMAT verbal section, pardon me, there's not as obvious of a reason to use your Scratchwork. You're not going to have any reason to outline one sentence correction sentence, or a 2 or 3 sentence critical reasoning passage. So you might occasionally want to jot some notes about the structure of a critical reasoning passage, or maybe make a couple notes about a mistake that you find in a sentence correction question, but personally I never do that. What I do, however, on every single GMAT verbal question is write down something that looks like this. 5 answer choices, A, B, C, D, E, nothing fancy, nothing very well structured, but just 5 letters that I can cross off as I determine which answer choices might be right, which answer choices are definitely wrong. The reason I do this is, especially on critical reasoning questions and on some of the more difficult sentence correction and reading comprehension questions, as they get more difficult, you'll spend more and more time on individual answer choices. So let's say you're on a difficult critical reasoning question, you're analyzing choice A, you decide choice A is definitely wrong. Then you look at choice B is definitely wrong. Then you get to choice C, and you spend a few seconds thinking about it. You might go back to the passage, check something to see whether choice C really works with it. And by the time you're done looking at choice C, if you're not making notes like this, then you might have forgotten that you evaluated choice A and choice B. So by making these notes, you might end up with something like this. You might spend 60 seconds, 90 seconds going through the answer choices, quickly eliminating, for instance, A, B, and D, and thinking that C and E are definitely possible. By having this, you don't need to keep track of this stuff in your head. You can use all that brain power to determine whether these answer choices are actually correct. So once you've done this, you know immediately, just by looking at your Scratchwork, go back to C, go back to E, compare those are your only possible choices. If you don't do this, you might not think this will happen, but I can virtually guarantee that if you don't do this, you will hit a point during the test where you forget the work you've done. And the clock is ticking, you've got a lot of pressure on GMAT test day. Unless you've jotted this down as you go, you could end up losing 2 or 3 minutes, and every minute or 2 on test day can really count. So, critical reasoning, sentence correction, even reading comprehension questions as well, write down your 5 answer choices. Take advantage of the scratch paper, even if it isn't natural to take notes during the verbal section. For more GMAT verbal tips, like I mentioned before, my website, gmathacks.com, and the textbook I've written for the entire GMAT verbal section, Total GMAT Verbal. See you next time.